Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. We have the Gallardo back in the garage today. I know it's not the NSX. Please watch the video anyway. We're going to have a short series of videos with the goal of getting this car on track so that we can do that NSX versus Gallardo comparison properly. First things we're going to do, these three videos in order, are basically going to be revolving around, changing all of the fluids in this car, because near as I can tell, that's really all it needs. We need to get the specific weight of oil in the car that it's going to need for that kind of track use, high temperature use. Then we're going to change basically everything but the rear transaxle fluid, because that's been done recently. But we're going to change the oil, the front diff fluid, the brake fluid, and the coolant. Some of it is just due for, others is kind of an unknown quantity. Like I don't know which brake fluid is in this car, and that I'm just forced to assume that it's probably some crap. So, so I'll be swapping that out for some weapons grade Castrol stuff. But today we're going to start out with the just basic oil change. There is a little bit of a ritual to this car because it is dry sump, but it's really nothing terribly complicated. So we're going to do just kind of a quick and dirty video. Well, a quick video, hopefully not too dirty. You know, I mean, drain pan placement is an art form, really, if we think about it. But that's what we're doing today, changing the oil to get the specified weight in there. So we're going to cover what you would need for this job, and then the kind of quick how-tos, torque specs, because they're kind of hard to find in the manual, and I'll also cover the type of oil and why I'm using the type of oil I'm using. Let's get started. To accomplish the oil change on your pre-LP Gallardo, you're going to need the following tools and materials. 10.5 liters, or approximately 11 Freedom Unit quarts of your oil du jour, an oil filter wrench, which is kind of a special tool on these cars, and you'll see why, crush washers, gloves, in my case an 8mm and a T50 torque socket, some ratchet handles, and a torque wrench. For the love of God, a torque wrench to put the drain plugs back in. First things first, you're going to want to get your car up in the air. You really only need the rear end of the car elevated. However, I like to do my oil changes with the car as level as possible. So I've used the 2-jack method here to lift the rear and then lift the front on both sides kind of as evenly as possible. So kind of one pump on the left, one pump on the right, a few pumps on the left, a few pumps on the right, just so you're raising the car as evenly as possible, so as not to put too much torque on the chassis, as that can risk, I've heard, breaking the windshield, and that's an expensive proposition. With the car in the air though, let's move around back, where we can stick our head under the car from the passenger side and find the first of 2 drain plugs. This plug is at the bottom of the sump, and then there's a second plug that I'm going to access from the rear. You can kind of find it here above the starter, and that is the drain plug for the dry sump tank. With our catch pan in position and some safety glasses on, because this can get a little bit splashy, we are going to drain the dry sump tank first. Once the flow from the dry sump tank is mostly run its course, I'll move a smaller pan underneath that tank to catch any drips, and move my larger pan up under the second drain plug at the bottom of the engine sump. Bear in mind the engine sump is from where you're going to get most of your volume of oil flow. So position your drain pan accordingly. It's not going to come out and just dribble straight down. It's going to project sideways a little bit. And if you put your drain pan directly underneath, you may end up wearing most of the oil before you have a chance to reposition it. So while things are draining, we can tackle the oil filter situation. It's in kind of an entertaining area back here in the V of the engine between and behind the 2 throttle bodies there. So what you're going to end up doing is you're going to take loose this air tube right here, and then you'll be able to fit your tool in there, set it on top, and then kind of like rotate, lift, reposition, and repeat to get that loose. When it does, as the housing is kind of coming out and you see the O-ring pop up, I would advise waiting a couple of seconds to let the oil, now that you've kind of broken the seal, let the oil drain back down into the filter pedestal before trying to remove it. I'm also going to pack the area around it with some paper towels just to soak up anything that kind of drips out of there. Over at the workbench for just a moment here, one thing you could run into is if your filter cartridge doesn't come out gracefully with the filter housing, you know, mine just kind of drops out of there. Look in the bottom here, and there should be two clips. You'll see my filter housing only has one, and that means it's not able to actually retain the filter cartridge in the housing for removal and reinstallation. That's not a big deal from a functional standpoint. I knew this was the case, so I procured a new filter housing since the last time I did this change. So I need everybody to pay attention here because there is a short list of ways that you can screw this job up and have a very expensive day, and this is one of them. This O-ring here is mission critical. You want to make sure that you have an O-ring on your filter housing when it goes back on. If you buy a filter kit from a reputable source like Jason Bertman, for instance, Bertman Industries, it will come with an O-ring. Your filter cartridge will come with an O-ring. You do want to make sure that the O-ring is on there, and you want to make sure even more so that there's only one O-ring on here. You can kind of remove the old one with a pick or get it started removing it with a pick, and then it should just kind of come off. You won't want to reuse one after you've done this, of course. To put a new O-ring on, it's kind of just a reverse of that process. You kind of push it over get it over the lip here and then roll it down. And then make sure it is seated in the channel. Once you get kind of one part in there, you can just kind of run your finger around and get it seated the rest of the way in there. But that's how you do that. My new filter housing, I note, comes with an O-ring on it. I'm going to kind of test it for pliability and decide if I'm going to use this one or the one that came with the filter. But this one you can see has both tabs intact, so it should keep hold of the new filter cartridge, so I'm not having to juggle that on the way back in. I realize now that I've already installed the new one that there is a way you can mess that up, so here you go. These two thin areas right here, they also have a little kind of keyway in the bottom. That's what those tabs latch onto, so you're going to want to line up the thin areas, seen from the top here. You want to line up these two areas with the tabs and push down, and you'll hear a click once it's fully in place. And the bottom of it, and the part that faces up, well, this way up, which will eventually be down, but the part you can still see, you should be able to see an O-ring on the bottom of the filter here as well. So now that we have our filter cartridge installed in our filter housing, we've taken a little bit of fresh oil and just run it around both O-rings, the one on the bottom of the filter cartridge, as well as the one on the filter housing, just to make sure that seal is moist as it's installed. As you go to reinstall the oil filter, there are really two things that you want to pay attention to. The first one is not cross-threading the filter into the pedestal, and the second is not over-tightening it. It should start easily by hand through several rotations. Eventually you will want to switch back over to your wrench to finish it up and tighten it all the way down. You do not need to really tighten it down too much. Again, this is an O-ring around the circumference of a filter housing, not a flat ring against a mating surface as you might have been familiar with a traditional metal canister filter. So tightening it more doesn't necessarily mean you're improving the seal at all. And once it stops moving again with reasonable effort, you're good. Once you have the new filter and housing installed, you will want to remember to reconnect the vacuum line that you disconnected for access. With the oil flow reduced to the slowest of drips, it's now time to reinstall our drain plugs. Again, we're going to do this with a torque wrench set to 45 Newton meters, or about 33 freedom unit foot-pounds, and paying close attention to that. And as we're going back on with the drain plug with new crush washers, we're also going to validate that none of the crush washers have remained stuck to either the sump or the tank as we do this. Again, you only want, as with the O-ring, you only want one crush washer per drain plug. Before we pour it in the car, let's talk a little bit about the oil that we've selected today. This is a Liqui-Moly SAE 10W60 full synthetic motor oil. It is the closest thing I could find to something that would work on this car that was in stock at a store. I despise ordering motor oil. Now, the manual for these early Gallardos specifies 3 different possible weights of oil for different usage. For normal use, it specifies a 5W40. For sport use or exceedingly hot climates, it wants a 20W50, and if you live in Hoth, in particularly cold environments, it specifies a 0W30. Now we've got a 10W60, which is kind of somewhere in that mix. The 60 on the high end is higher than what it would be specified. However, I have it on good authority that many people use a 10W60 in these cars with perfectly fine results, especially for track use, because you have still the lighter weight 10W at startup, but you have the protection of a 60 weight once you get things fully up to very, very hot temperatures on a track. So that's what we're using today. Again, not sponsored at all by Liqui-Moly. It's what I could get my hands on. So I've put the car back on the ground in preparation to add oil to it because we do have to fire it up mid-fill. The way this works is you add 6 liters of oil to the tank, start the car at idle for 1 minute, turn it off, and then come back and add the remaining 4 liters to top off the system. Congratulations, you've now completed the oil change on your Pre-LP Gallardo. Before you go and enjoy it though, I would encourage everybody to go through the oil level checking procedure, which is a little bit of a ritual in its own right. You would let the car warm all the way up at idle until the oil temperature is somewhere in the 70 to 80 C range. At that point, you want to build the RPMs up and hold the idle at 2,000 RPM for 2 minutes, 120 seconds. Then switch the car off, pull the dipstick, wipe it, and then dip for your oil level. You want it to be pretty much exactly in between the 2 dots. Overfilling is nearly as dangerous as underfilling in these cars, so please be mindful of adding oil without doing that full procedure as described in the service manual. But with that, I hope you found this video entertaining, if not informative, or informative, if not entertaining, I guess is probably more appropriate here. We will be in our next installment, probably changing either the diff fluid or the coolant. I'm not sure exactly which yet. It's just whatever I decide to tackle. But that's what's coming up, so stay tuned for that. And then eventually, long goal is getting this car on the track before the end of the year. Hopefully that can happen. But thanks for watching in the meantime. I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World, and we'll see you all in the next video, if not at the track.